Hi, everyone. Tyler Mannion here, NPC and IFBB Pro League Vice President. And today we're going to go over the recap for the men's open bodybuilding at the Arnold UK. And this is brought to you by Uprising, powered by Mid45. So let's get into the show. And first, I want to say what an amazing show this was. You know, when you have two top guys that are bringing it, it was so exciting in this venue that if you guys weren't there and you guys aren't coming to these live shows, you're missing out. You know, I want to give a big shout out to the UK crowd. They brought a soccer-like atmosphere to this show. They were making noise for everybody, but it was literally deafening when Samson came out on Saturday night to do his posing routine. And then once we started doing the comparisons, the energy in there was just electric. So hopefully some of you UK fans can make it to the Olympia this year, because you'll force the US crowd to start giving the US bodybuilders the same kind of love. But it was one of my favorite shows I ever judged because of the crowd and also because of how great Hadi and Samson looked. And they both made big improvements from the first night to the second night as well. So we'll get to breaking down the athletes. And first we'll go through Hadi and Samson and we'll go pose by pose for them. The footage we'll use will be the Saturday night footage because I think they both improved, you know, a lot actually from Friday to Saturday. I'd say they probably both improved about the same amount, but it made for a great show. I'd say Saturday night Samson is definitely by far the best version of Samson that we've seen yet. And Hadi from Friday to Saturday really filled out and brought a package that was very similar to the Arnold in Columbus. So here we go, pose by pose. First pose up is the front double bicep. Now, this front double bicep on Friday, I definitely gave to Hadi. The conditioning and cuts and separation definitely made it lean towards him. He's also done an amazing job of making this pose become a strength for him. When he pulls up his vacuum, his waist ends up becoming so much smaller, you know, on stage than it really is. And his taper and the flow to his physique has gotten so much better in this pose. I mean, I think it even improved a lot just from the Olympia last year to the contest these past 2 weeks. Samson's also brought up his front double bicep a lot more, I think, even from the Olympia last year. The overall flow and balance is great. On Friday, I definitely gave this pose to Hadi. On Saturday night, I thought this pose was really a toss-up. I could see why people would like each guy in this pose. I think overall, Samson has a little bit better flow than Hadi in this pose, but still the conditioning and the separation of the muscles and how everything was popping, I just barely leaned towards Hadi on Saturday night. The next pose is the front lat spread. Now, I think the front lat spread is Hadi's weakest pose, and I think it's a pretty strong pose for Samson. Samson, you see the fullness in his arms and his shoulders and especially his chest. He has a nice taper into a nice small waist. In this pose, you see that Hadi's waist is definitely wider. His chest is definitely flatter than Samson's here. And his taper, while he still has a good taper, it's not as dramatic with everything around it flowing into his waist as his waist looks a little bit wider. The lower body, again, both these guys have great legs from the front. On Saturday as well, Samson's legs definitely had more separation to them and more cuts. So when you take that into account with the upper body as well, I gave this pose to Samson. So it's 1-1 right now. The next pose is the side chest. You see again here that Samson has a lot of roundness and fullness to his muscle, you know, especially in his upper body. So when you're going shoulder to shoulder here, you look at the fullness and the thickness of the chest. And again, the overall flow and balance between his upper and his lower body. His side legs are very, very big. And now we saw the lines and the detail really starting to come out on Saturday night. You go over to Hadi. I still think this is a strong pose for Hadi, but you see that Samson has definitely more fullness to the chest. You see his side leg is definitely bigger as well. And now when he's in this kind of condition that he was in on Saturday night, you can see the lines and the details in his legs that match up great against Hadi's, and Hadi's legs are smaller than his from the side. So overall, again, with the balance and the fullness, I give Samson this pose to make it 2-1 for Samson. Next up is the back double bicep. And I think Hadi has improved his back double, even from the Olympia, a great deal. It's really impressive, actually, to be training for this long and to make the kind of improvement that I think he's made to his back in a very, very short period of time. So in this pose, I definitely give it to Hadi. He added more depth and detail to his back. I feel like his back even looks wider right now. The detail in the back of his arms in this pose, which we see, I think has gone a little bit better than it was at the Olympia. And then also his legs look great from the back. And I think he added a little bit more width to his legs from the back as well since the Olympia. I think this is a much improved pose. Then we get to Samson. I think Samson keeps improving his back poses. For the back double, you saw a little bit more depth and detail back there. He still needs to add more width for me. You saw, though, on Saturday, really the width and the detail of his lower body started to really show in this pose. So the difference in conditioning made a big difference for him. But overall, especially when you're looking at the overall back, I give this pose to Hadi to make it 2-2. The next pose is the back lat spread. Again, Hadi improved this pose. You could see the thickness back there and the depth to his back when he gets all the way out there. His width definitely improved as well. Take that, into consideration with his lower body, and it's an extremely strong pose for him right now. Samson, you can see this pose is definitely improving. I think even flexibility-wise, you can tell right now on Saturday that he's pulling out his lats more. He's getting them, he's getting the full extension and the full width to his lats, but he still needs more width in this pose. And just to keep doing what he's been doing to keep improving it, to turn this pose into a strength for him. But as of right now, Hadi wins this pose, so it's now 3-2. Next up is the side tricep pose. Now, the side tricep, Hadi, again, from the side, I think, when he's standing next to a guy like Samson, you can see there's definitely a size difference. But you see the crisp detail in this pose with Hadi when it comes to, even though his chest doesn't have the roundness that Samson has, it has the striations and the detail. Obviously, the midsection is flat, and his abs and serratus are insanely detailed. His arms and shoulders and his tricep looks great in this pose. His side leg is still good, even though it's smaller than Samson's. Now, in this pose, Samson needs to work on hitting this pose a little bit better. His stomach is distended when he hits this pose a little bit. His abs aren't flat, as you see with Hadi here in this pose. I think this is what hurts Samson in this pose. So, again, as he keeps getting his conditioning better and better, and if he can make adjustments to this pose, this is a pose that I think he can end up flipping in the future. But right now, and what it looked like this weekend, Hadi takes this pose for me. So it's now 4-2 Hadi. Next up is the ab and thigh pose. This pose is just, a crazy, crazy pose for Hadi. Basically probably no one beats him in the ab and thigh pose in the whole entire professional league right now. So the best that guys can do is just keep improving their ab and thighs pose next to him to make sure it's not a blowout pose for him. And I think when you see even the difference from Friday to Saturday with Samson, this pose is getting stronger and stronger for him. He can do the same thing. He can pull a vacuum. He can crunch down on the abs. You see the detail in his quads when he's flexing his leg, the separation when he's not flexing them, the taper down into a nice small waist. His abs can be a little bit deeper here, and the separation in his legs could even get better. But this pose has improved a lot for him. I think it's going to be a strength standing next to a lot of other guys. But when we're comparing Samson and Hadi alone here, Hadi definitely takes this pose to make it 5-2. And then the last pose is the most muscular pose. Now, again, this is a very, very strong pose for Hadi. He also hits it a very smart way, like I've said before. He doesn't even clasp his hands. He keeps his knuckles together, so he keeps the width here when he hits this pose. You see all the striations in his chest, the detail throughout his abdomen. His arms look good when he's flexing them like this, and he's keeping them out wide. His lower body, again, is great. Now, Samson has the fullness and the roundness here. All he's missing is the deeper separation and striations in this pose. So this is another one of these closer poses, But as it stands right now, for me this weekend, I would give it to Hottie. However, you see these guys were feeding off the energy and really moving around and hitting a lot of most muscular poses. Once they go out into other poses, for example, the crab most muscular, Samson definitely has an advantage here over Hottie. So, when it comes to these really, really close shows, the guys need to make sure they're thinking of, while they're still getting excited and feeling the energy of the crowd, to make sure you're only hitting your best poses, because if you start hitting a pose that another guy's better in, we're taking everything into account while we're watching. So overall, pose by pose, it was 6-2 Hottie. Even though the score is 6-2, this competition between these two was much, much closer than Columbus was. And I think you can see that, again, in the front double, I would have no argument which person you gave that pose to, whether it was Samson or Hottie. So again, right there, that changes it. And let's just talk about going forward, what each guy needs to do and improve on. And for Hottie, I think you can tell right now, like the front lat spread, he needs to keep working on getting that pose better. And then also the side poses, he can get that side leg to come up just a little bit more. But also the upper body, if you can get a little bit more of that fullness and roundness to the chest while keeping the striations, that would definitely help him and help him keep width across the top, shoulder to shoulder while he hits these poses. Now for Samson, if Samson wants to, keep improving, and let's just use Hottie as an example because they competed against each other, he needs to turn that front double bicep pose around, which again on Saturday already, that pose could have went either way. The next one that he really needs to focus on, I would say, is the most muscular. It's the second closest pose between those two that Hottie won. He has the size and the roundness and the fullness, like I said, but bringing out more of that detail while keeping the abs under control the whole entire time while posing is only going to serve him really well, because he is just a bigger guy in general. And when you can keep that fullness and roundness to your muscle, but also bring in the detail, that's going to make a huge, huge difference. And the legs are going to be affected with that detail as well. And that's only going to make the legs look bigger. And when it comes to, just that quad development, he has some of the best, in the entire world. So that pose. And then the last one I would say for him is the side tricep pose. He needs to keep working on hitting the pose better, making sure the abs are flat, but then also just bringing out more detail in that pose as well. He's a bigger guy, so once he figures out how to hit that pose better and can control it the whole entire time on stage with better detail, it's going to be hard to stand next to for some of these guys that are just smaller than him. There's a path for him. There's a path to overcoming Hottie, right? For Hottie, there's a path to keep getting more dominant. And these guys were second and third last year, so you got Mr. Olympia out there that I'm sure Derek has been watching these past 2 weekends like, man, I better be training hard and making improvements as well, because the Olympia, I think, is just going to be unbelievable this year. I'm so excited for it after these past 2 weeks. And, we got a couple other top guys that we're going to see throughout the year, so I can't wait to see what improvements they've made as well. And I just think this Olympia is going to be unbelievable this year. So if you want to experience a show in person, get to that show and give these guys your energy, because it was just so awesome to see them feeding off the crowd this weekend, and that kind of support I know goes a long way with them. So that wraps it up for the top two. We'll review third and fourth place, which was Akeem and John. Now, as you guys saw by the scores, John won on Friday night and Akeem won on Saturday night. The difference is it wasn't a clean sweep for John on Friday, and it was a clean sweep for Akeem on Saturday. That ended up being the point differential. So I think on Friday, conditioning wise and, fullness and pop, John definitely had the advantage on Friday. And then on Saturday, Akeem came out, and just like he did 2 weeks ago, he looked so much better on Saturday night than he did on Friday. I'll take you through pose by pose here in what I saw. So the first pose up is the front double bicep. I think this pose is very close between the two. You see they both have nice taper. They have a nice flow overall to their body from their arms from their arms into their, into their lats, down to a nice small waist. And then their legs are pretty balanced overall. Now, I think Akeem has a little bit more size here, and he has just a little bit more to his legs as well. John needs to add more leg width, and add a little bit more to the quads from the front. So on Saturday night, I gave the front double to Akeem just by a hair. The next up would be the front lat spread. In the front lat spread here, again, you kind of see the size difference between John and Akeem. John's just a little bit smaller. Again, great taper. You're seeing fullness throughout the arms into the chest. Akeem has a little bit of a fuller chest. And then their waists are both pretty small with the X frame and good legs. But again, I think Akeem has a little bit of an edge on the legs to John from the front when he's in this kind of condition. So I gave Akeem the front lat spread as well to make it 2-0. Next up is the side chest. Akeem's side poses are really, really strong. You see just how big and how round and full his muscle is in these poses. He can stand up to a lot of guys and beat a lot of guys in the pro league in these side poses. So the side chest is just extremely strong for him. You see the fullness and the development of his arms, his shoulders, his chest. Stomach is flat. Going to his lower body, his side leg is crazy. He has those crazy lines too in his side leg, which makes it even more impressive. And this was a clear pose for Akeem for me. So that would make it 3-0. Next up is the back double bicep. Back double bicep, I think John keeps improving his back double. He's added a good bit more depth and detail that you can see back there. Now, I still think he needs to add some more, with a little bit more width as well. But his hamstrings and his leg width from the back has definitely improved. And it can still improve a little bit more, but it's improved a lot. And overall, this has become a pretty strong pose for him. Akeem, this is definitely his weakest pose. So this is where it hurts him against a lot of guys. He just has to keep improving that overall back to match, his legs from the back and also his arms from the back. The back has to match with the rest of his physique. So this was a clear pose for John for me to make it 3-1. Next up is the back lat spread. Again, a pretty strong pose for John here. He can keep working on improving the width and add a little bit more depth to the back. But when you look from the balance from his back down to his legs, he's definitely the more balanced bodybuilder here. Akeem has improved his back lat spread. He knows these back poses are the two poses he really needs to focus on. But it's definitely improved from years prior. You can see more width. He's getting his lats out more. You can see a little bit more depth back there too. And obviously, his legs from the back are very strong. But this was still a pose that went to John to make it 3-2. The next pose is the side tricep. Like I said before with his side poses, they're very, very strong. This was a clear pose for Akeem here. He can match up against a ton of guys in this pose. John's side tricep is still actually a very strong pose. He's really just getting outsized and outmassed in this pose by Akeem. And when the conditioning is like this, Friday, John had the edge, but on Saturday, Akeem had the edge. But when the conditioning is close and you have that size advantage, you're going to take the pose. So Akeem takes it to make it 4-2. Next up is the abdominals and thigh pose. John's ab and thigh pose is really good. Once he really blows out on his abs and gets his waist in, his waist becomes super small. So you see that great taper and the illusion of the taper all the way, with his arms over his head coming into the nice small waist. Again, his quads from the front look solid. They could use a little bit more size, but still overall with the flow of the pose, it is a great pose for him, very strong. Akeem has a nice taper in this pose. I think the abs could have a little bit more detail in them. And overall, his taper just isn't as dramatic in this pose as John's is. So I give this pose to John. That makes it 4-3. And then the final pose is the most muscular pose. Again, this is a pose that Akeem shows off the size and the fullness and the roundness of his muscle. And when he's in this type of condition, he's able to outmuscle and outmass John in this pose. So that would give it 5-3 to Akeem. I think every judge saw it pretty similar to this, which is why you saw the straight thirds and straight fourths on Saturday night for Akeem. And I thought it was a really exciting battle for third at this show between these two. And these two are guys that have been around for a really long time and have kind of made a statement this year that, they're back and they're coming back to get back into that top 10 at the Olympia. So I'm excited to see what both of them can bring to the stage this year and hopefully get their qualification for this year as well for the Olympia. That wraps it up for Men's Open.